Hello, welcome to my studio. I just thought I'd pop in to say hello at the beginning and I'll show you my materials that I'm going to be using. Well, here are the two brushes, stuff I've been using for years, big squirrel hair mop and smaller Chinese brush, and bocking for £200 not half-imperial sheets there, laptop which will have my references on it, and that's the camera that I'll be filming on. Okay, so get on with the hard work now then, I suppose. Yeah. Okay, so let's draw out this scene in quite basic terms. Simple scene, to be honest, so it shouldn't need too much. Don't need all that much land in the foreground. I think there's a background hill that I'll make slightly bigger, perhaps. So if we have a third land including that, I think we'll be okay. May slope this down a bit more than it is in the scene. Okay, then the hedgerow sort of starts from about there. Not sure if I need to change that, hopefully not. There's a hedgerow coming down here. It seems to be sort of roughly head height, so fairly horizontal there. Our tree is going to come about here. And we've got a building which is going to be very central, and that's fine in my book. Sometimes, as long as the eye moves around the scene, even if this is our focal point, really, it, I think, could be absolutely fine to be fairly central. And various trees and things around about, not much, but just things that add a little bit more interest that I may or may not add. We'll see if it needs it. At least that's my plan. Just switch my computer to the tree that I'm going to put in. Okay, I've chosen to put in a different tree, something that I find a little bit more interesting to paint today, hopefully, if it goes okay. Lots of lovely winding branches on here, but I don't need to draw them all in, I don't think, because it's probably going to be better if I leave that to the brush and to what I see in the moment. Hopefully I'll see just what matters when it comes to it and not do too much. But actually, let me just mark in, because I've made a few marks when I forgot I was doing this tree. I ought to remove anything that's going to mislead me with the brush when I'm just kind of firing it around really quickly. So, right, that hopefully will be enough of a guide. We'll see. Clouds. Also, in this field, there's a track in the reference photo coming down here. I might make it a bit wider. I'm not looking at that photo. Well, I might go back to that photo. Okay. Yeah, we could make it a bit further there's like grass going down the middle of this track, and we could have might leave a few bits of white just where there might be puddles, okay, reflecting light, just going to be little bits of white basically, and also here I think that looks about okay. Some ruts, rather than grass, I'll put some ruts like ploughed field or a stubble field. And then in the background, that sort of goes down over the horizon towards the building. I'm hoping this isn't going to look like a massive tree about 1,000 foot tall and right next to a tiny building. I'll have to make the hedge disappear more as it goes over the top here than in the reference photo. And then it looks like this hedge actually continues further and further until eventually it gets to this, what is quite a big barn kind of building. Right then, hillside behind. Yeah, I don't want much of a hillside behind. We could have more of a slope on here. Right. And then the hillside behind is just sort of, it's going to be very faint. I'm not going to draw it because I want it soft edged. But well, yeah, no, I'm not going to draw it. And very little detail. So the clouds, I'm going to have the sun behind the tree, so that's going to be starkly silhouetted. I think I'm going to have a patch of cloud sort of coming down like this and then coming in here. But I won't draw it, we'll just see what happens. And there we go. So here's my palette. I've cleaned it up a little bit. I'm just going to use 3 colours, which is going to be this one, raw umber, Winsor & Newton raw umber, and a bit of Indian red, which is also Winsor & Newton Indian red, to give me a nice pinky tone, pinky colour for the sky. And mixing it with the raw umber will give me a more orangey colour just for the base. So I don't know at all if this sky is going to work with the way that I'm going to paint the scene. But that's, I always like to have something of an adventure, of an unknown, like that. And I don't take very long, sometimes when I feel inspired to paint, to think about it all. It's nice to just see what happens and get on with paintings and putting some paint on the paper when you're in the mood to. For me, when I'm in the studio, it's a different thing for me. When I'm outdoors, I'm inspired by the subject in front of me, and I try really to work from that, because that is what it's all about. But in the studio, I kind of work a little bit differently. So I ought to mix up some of this as well. So Indian red mixed with phthalo blue here, and this is going to be for my clouds, and I'm going to be wanting some fairly dark mixture of this. I mix a bit up at the beginning like this because when it comes to doing it, it has to be very quick, so it's very handy to have a bit to draw on. And putting these 2 colours together, actually, it's sometimes a bit tricky to tell what the actual colour is. Obviously there's the tone as well, but I always have a scrap of paper to just test my paintbrush on when in doubt. Okay, switch to my cloud scene as a guide for the sky. So I'm going to put a background of hazy, very high cloud, which the sun, fairly low sun, is shining through, creating quite a glow. So it's a kind of soft, suffused light. And then place the clouds on top. There's a little bit of a halo effect, silver lining around the edge of these clouds It's very subtle. I may exaggerate that a little bit, and again, I'm not sure if that will work because I'm kind of changing what I'm looking at a little bit. If I do that, we'll see, and we'll hope for the best. Just getting some totally clean water on my brush, and okay, here we go. I want to soften around where my light is, so I've just put a little water around there. Bit of water elsewhere. But then most of this now, okay, is going to be this pinky colour, which is a lot of Indian red. I decided to do this sky so I could get, hopefully, quite a warm painting. Well, it's going to be fairly dark in places, so I wanted it to be a bit warmer than the references as well. Having said that, I tend to make things a bit cool, so by the end it may not be warm. A bit more orangey as we get to the bottom, so I've got my Indian red with raw umber. Bringing it down over where I am going to be putting in a hill. I have to be quick to do that as well. Right now, bringing this warmth sort of close to around where I've got the sun. A lot of this is going to be covered with the tree, of course. Right now, going into slightly cooler mix. And yes, there is going to be sort of grey in places. It's not all totally warm, and I'm not keeping totally white behind the tree because that would look fake. Okay, so now let's get in our darker cloud. Well, maybe I'll go slightly progressively darker. Change this colour slightly, just a bit. And we have a bigger shape section of cloud just here. Not often I do all wet in wet sky, which this virtually is. I've got a little bit of white liquid, but not a lot. And going back to a slightly warmer mix. It's all quite subtle, but a little bit warmer for a bit of background. Cloud coming in here, disappearing actually behind what will be the hill. How's it looking? Right, so that might do, hopefully. Yeah, okay, right, well, we'll give it a go. And then, so switching brushes to my smaller brush, my black sheep, I call it. Information about that, if you're interested, is on my website. It's a Chinese brush that I modified. Some of you probably know this because I've painted with it for years. And I just have 2 or 3 of these on the go quite often. Anyway, mixing up some thicker paint, but actually what I want first is fairly sort of not that thick. So, and a cooler colour for this distant hill, and I'm hoping that the paint paper is still, yeah, it's damp there, thankfully, still. And I've got to switch to my other photo of the scene. Alright, that's hopefully all I'm going to need. In the scene there are some trees here. So I'll put them in. They are distant and small. They add a little bit of something. Maybe I'll come back and add a bit of a wall or something here later. I'm not sure, but nice to play things like that by ear a bit. So now I can move on to the ground. Okay, let's dive in. Bit of the raw umber, and well, if we say it's a ploughed field, what are we going to do? I don't know, ploughed or green? Okay, like a stubble field, maybe, or early on in spring, where we got things growing out of it. I really should decide these things before we start, really, I suppose, but I don't know. We want a bit of different colour in this, just a bit, so some green, that's why. So I'm going to put some, I don't know, this is kind of really making stuff up too much, perhaps. And anyway, because it's a low light, this really is going to be you know, subtle and quite darkish. In the distance, I don't want to go too dark, I think. Not for all of this, that's for sure. I don't want this to bleed up into that hill where I've just painted, so I've got to go easy there, but where the join is, don't really want to run back going up there. That's kind of a greeny grey, it kind of looks alright to me, I think. Change it a bit as we get close to the edge. And we don't want dry brush everywhere, so I'm wetting quite a lot of it, but leave a few horizontal nicks. I'm not sure if in the corner, just turn off and on my camera again. I'm not sure if in the corner we want any white. Look, let's get rid of that. No, nothing too much there. That might be where I would put a signature and nothing else. Don't want anything too busy. One corner you want to keep not busy. Well, I think that's a fairly useful rule of thumb myself. Anyway, let's move on. Keep moving yourself along. Some strong darks in here. While it's all still slightly moist, it won't last dark, properly dark for long, this, because Bockingford never does. It's very absorbent paper. So this is actually all wet on dry. Something I might very often think to do in this situation is put down some just pure water first. But you can kind of do it after. There's lots of different ways to do it, and I like to mix things up and do things in a way that might seem quite perverse sometimes, because you get more interesting range sometimes of marks, of textures as a result. Let's go a bit warmer towards this left-hand side. Yeah, a muddy track anyway. It did have grass growing down the middle, but if we say this is kind of our muddy track down here, and I will leave a couple of bits of white. It could be some puddles just there, but then we want this to blend in with definitely some kind of grass, well, some, not necessarily grass, foliage, vegetables. So I'm very much on just sketch away with the brush. I think there could be a lot of mud in here. And keeping the eyes on all spinning plates. Let's go back here before this dries. So if there's puddles here, then maybe there's ridges that these puddles are actually in. Makes sense, doesn't it? And actually this might end up getting darker and darker. I don't know, because when I put this hedge in, it's going to be pretty dark. And it may be that I'll need to just darken it further, but maybe not. This is the real pleasure of having a bit of an adventure as you paint, for me. So with that, I'm not going to do too much more before properly stopping here, but because I'm working basically from nothing for this bit, it's a bit risky, everything that I do. So less is more, less is safer in that situation. You can always come back if something needs something more happening in it, say, you can come back and add a bit more. So okay, so we've covered a lot of paper, hedgerow, tree, building still to do, and then we'll see how it looks. Could have done with leaving a puddle just there, I felt, so just around that area there is a very roughed up cloud bit of okay. Now let's soften. Let's put in this hedge. I'm going to soften at the edge of the paper here. Now this is still slightly damp. The paper, I can see it's all buckled up. Really, I ought to put the hairdryer on it. However, and coming along here, a few other bits. Got to get on with it. So I'm dampening where I think I might want some soft edges. Now there is foliage, so if it's spring, there is foliage coming out, I've decided. So we got, again, a bit of green. I'm going to warm that up though, actually. The Indian red into my raw umber and phthalo mix will give me my range of greens. And yeah, let's just say it's fairly early spring, so there's still a fair bit here that is not out in leaf. And I'm observing the way the hedge looks in the photo. There's kind of lots of twiggy bits. Young shoots look like they're getting cut back every few years. The top of the hedge, as you often see, a bit of light coming through in the middle. There wouldn't be total light because the next field would be shining through, but a little bit of white hopefully might just give an indication, as if the light was just shining on the next field, just a little bit of light there. And then more grass, but very much silhouetted anyway, all of this really, so dark, but, and I don't know if it will come out on the film, however, you can detect the colour. Hopefully when I take a photograph at the end it might be visible, if not on the camera, on the video. So you see where it's damp there, it's now softening off as I go towards this distant area. Hedgerow disappearing behind the hillside towards that building. What I wanted these soft bits where I wet is so that the tree will stand out as hard edged, mostly, or a lot of it. So we get that important contrast. It's all about contrasts. It's all about relationships, subtle relationships, and also strong contrasts. Just putting a bit of stronger, warmer dark just into this near part in places of the hedge, because there's a lot of cool dark in there. Now we could maybe start, this is probably still not totally dark here actually, so dry, I meant to say, not totally dry, but it almost was. So anyway, I just thought a tiny mark there with extra dark. I use my fingers quite a lot, and again it does give you just another slight variation in terms of texture and so on. But I want this tree, I've got to switch to my other photo. Okay, I want this tree to grow out of this hedge, so it's nicely sort of bedded, it seems to be bedded into the hedge. So I don't really want that all to dry before I have got it in. And I might have to get the hairdryer on this, I don't know. I want to re-wet this in a few places, that's all. it's fairly dry, so I can perhaps re-wet it. To re-wet the paper, I just use another one of my brushes. Where I want bits of soft edge before I paint. But first I'm going to just keep going, doing a few more branches. In fact, I do want already. There's no ivy growing up this tree. It's just not like that. But maybe it'd be good just to have some softening off in place, some little bits of bleed away. I don't know. Not much. And again, this is going to be pretty dark because it's silhouetted. I'm using more of the Indian red in my mix of Indian red and phthalo here, so it'll have a slightly warm tinge. Particularly warm tinge where it's coming up, you see, in front of the sun, and I'm not observing this at all from my references, but I know from previous experience that you do get that. Quite nice winding nature to some of these branches. Right, it's a fairly solid, thick tree, this, at the base. These bottom trunks, quite thick. I haven't got my best tree painting brush in my hand, I realise. Before I do too many of these, I ought to stop, because less is more, as you know. And you can always add more, if necessary, later. Yeah, let's change to a bit of green. Now again, I want some clean water actually, for what I'm going to do here. Just going to wet in places. Where I'm going to do this foliage, and some of this again may dry before I even get here actually. It might. Soft around the top here, in front of the light, yes, a lot of this I think, we'll see. Might want to be soft. And when you've got the moisture on the paper, it will dry out, it will dampen, of course, what is on your brush. So, going back to the palette, pick up some more of the pigment as I want it. squinting at this tree and just aiming for an interpretation of the type, bits of shape that I can see. As we get to the top, in front of that light again, I'm going to go for more of the warmth. Just turn off the camera again. Yeah, I'm going to go for more of the warmth up here. So there's a big bulk of foliage at the top there. And it might be quite good if I spare, if I'm going to have any more foliage in here, might be quite good if that is soft as well. But up here, I'm still damp. Now, what's my colour? I want that warmth. With trees like this, it's always trying to get a good range, part of the things that I have to think about, of small marks, just a few small marks, as well as the bigger bulks, to try to convey scale. So gradually building up the thing. Re-wetting here because I want this bit, I think, to be soft. A bit of foliage that's over the far side of the tree. So maybe if it's wet, soft on damp paper, it can help it look like it's a bit further away. So because a tree, of course, has depth from front to back. Right, now I'm getting to the point where I don't think it's quite done, but I ought to move on. I can come back and add, I can see, well, I don't know. There's not much needs to be done to this tree now, I don't think, but be able to judge that a lot better anyway when I move on and come back to it. So always try to remember, move yourself along. There are other branches, there's a lot more to it, but maybe we don't need them. So err on the side of caution, really. The more you continue to build up the rest of the painting, all the while you're creating the context in which to see whether something is necessary. And really, I totally recommend walking away when you're getting fairly far into it. Refresh your eyes totally and then just come back. And everything is a lot more obvious in terms of what needs doing and doesn't. Right, now, this building, it's a stark shape. Maybe at one end we want, yeah, this end. I'm just going to wet there and might have as if there is some kind of bush in there. So, and I'm going to a overall cooler colour for this. Hopefully help convey that it's a bit further away. Okay, and then start off with a slightly paler tone. Now, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the roof. I think we'll have the roof slightly lighter than the rest of the side of the building. There's a chimney sticking out the right hand side. Does that look like a chimney? Not sure. And there's a bit of a lean-to here. Okay, now, so leave that, move on again. How about, there is telegraph pole. Could be a figure. Might just darken the tree slightly down here. No, not sure. If in doubt, come back later and decide. So here we are, we're getting a fair way into the scene. I do need to take my eyes off it now, really, and something needs doing here, there and everywhere probably to sort of tie it together. I'm just going to take a pause and then come back and finish it off in a little while, I think. So, right, these bits of white are not great. These bits of white here are not helping, so we'll lose those. So I'm just going to dampen the area there. I probably won't knock all of them out, maybe, but most of them. Paste a bit of strong dark there, and so it could be that the light is coming through. Not there, the tree goes there. There won't be light shining through there. Now, another thing, I'm going to reduce this one to just a tiny nick. I don't think we want it at all. So there might be a shadow, as I was going to say. There would be light coming forward. The tree, unfortunately, the shadow would become right towards us. But I think actually, in the scheme of how bright that is and everything else, this is quite dark already. I think the shadow may be implied enough in how dark this is. Perhaps if I put the beginning of the shadow in and let it peter out. Let's try this. So I'm going to come a bit this direction, okay, as if the sun is slightly to the left. And then just let that join in with all this dark, and hopefully we don't need any more. You can see I'm not wanting to get carried away with all that, because it's just going to get muddy, and there is enough, I think, darkness here to hopefully imply, if you see what I mean, the shadow. So I'm just tidying it.